I'm Ralph Price, Executive Director of the McComb City Railroad Depot Museum. I wanted to share a few thoughts that I had about the depot, about the Railroad Museum itself. Our Railroad Museum was housed in the Railroad Depot here in McComb, and the depot has a very interesting history. The railroad shops were established in 1872 by Colonel Henry McComb, and he needed a place to work on the trains that was far away from New Orleans to, I guess you might say, to create a place, a good work environment where workers weren't as tempted to be in saloons and that type of thing. So he established the railroad repair shops 100 miles north, and the town of McComb was founded by the railroad. That's kind of unusual because most towns attract industry, but in this case, the industry forms a town. And he placed it between the newly formed towns of Magnolia and Summit, and it was established in 1872. And of course, this was before automobiles, so everybody got materials delivered to them by train. They rode the train as their main transportation if they were going to go any distance at all back then during the horse and buggy days. And so most towns that had a railroad would have a passenger depot that also served as a freight depot. And that's the way McComb's depot was built. There was probably a building before 1901 that served as the depot. But the depot that's currently on Railroad Avenue in McComb was built in 1901. And it's typical of a lot of the 20th century depots. If you look at it, it has real wide eaves that people stood under that accommodated passenger and freight. It had ramped entrances and real wide doors, especially on the south end, and that's where the freight room was, on the south end of the depot. And then the next room north of that was a real spacious passenger waiting room, and it was renovated in 1951. So it stayed pretty much the same from 1901 to 1951 when it was renovated, and that's when those oak benches were placed in there. Interestingly, we do have a bench that goes back what we think is to the original furnishings of the original depot in 1901, and that did survive the fire that we had back in 2021. I wanted to talk a little bit about that, but kind of bring the history of it up to date. The depot served also as a place to buy tickets. Back then, people would show up and they'd buy their ticket to their destination, and we're on the main line. In fact, the Illinois Central deemed itself the main line of Mid-America. That was kind of their moniker they used to describe themselves. It goes from New Orleans to Chicago, which is a distance of about 900 miles, and they started counting the mile markers from Chicago south. So we're on mile marker 807. So another 100 miles you're in New Orleans. And so over time people rode the train, and it was just a part of life. And in the 60s, in the late 1950s and early 1960s, when the interstate was formed, and that's when people really started traveling more by car for long distances instead of the trains. And of course, air travel also took away a lot of passengers because they could get places quicker, and so airports, you began to see them expand, and the trains still had some passengers to ride, but not nearly as many back in its heyday of the 40s and 50s and early 60s. Our depot is one of the larger depots for a town our size, and it showed the emphasis that McComb had as a transportation hub in southwest Mississippi. And again, you had the railroad shops that employed up to 1,000 men, and women also worked in the railroad shops. But they began to, over time, the cost of repair began to be such that they had layoffs. And not many people realize this, and to be honest, I didn't realize the extent that, say, the McComb Illinois Central shop would bid on work against other shops in Paducah, Kentucky, and Centralia, Illinois. They had other repair shops, and when they had big projects, then this shop in McComb would bid on a contract for that. And if they didn't get it, then sometimes they would have, it'd be a while before they had other work, so that's the reason that they had layoffs sometimes pretty frequently. Everything was based on seniority, so it was, the longer you were working there, the better chance you had to save your job or go to another shop facility in Paducah. There's many people that transferred back and forth to shops or to New Orleans. The way the jobs worked was by seniority based. The McComb Depot in 2001, well actually a couple of years before that, there was a big renovation and expansion of the depot. It's been an interesting history of it. The footprint of where the depot is now, it was exactly that size going back from 1901 till about 1976. Well, in 1976 there was an accident, and a train car got away from the track and ran into the north end of the depot. In fact, the northeast side was demolished, and so since they weren't using the entire building at that point, they just demolished the north 1/3 of the building, and it stayed that way for 25 years. And in 1998, the depot was reconstructed and that north wing was reestablished. And at that point, the way the configuration of the depot worked was that the Pike County Economic Development and Chamber of Commerce, they went into the north end and they leased that space. And about that time, the south end was established as a museum. The last superintendent of the railroad shops, Mr. Edwin Etheridge, along with Miss Winnie Lynn Howell, they co-founded the museum. Miss Winnie Lynn Howell served as the first executive director of it. And so they established that in the south end, and then you had the Amtrak waiting room that they leased space in, and then the Economic Development Foundation and Chamber of Commerce. So it was a busy place, a lot of people in and out still, even though passenger traffic had declined somewhat. So it takes us to about 2014, and that's when the Economic Development Foundation and the Chamber of Commerce, they went to other locations. The Chamber of Commerce was located on Main Street, and the Economic Development Foundation, they started their time at Southwest Mississippi Community College, where they're located still today. And so that allowed the museum to expand in 2014, and so we occupied the entire depot except for the Amtrak waiting room. We kept track of the number of visitors to the museum, and it increased dramatically over the years. We grew every year, and just prior to the fire in 2021, the year or two leading up to that, we had almost 10,000 visitors to come into the museum and to the depot and register with us, and we estimate that at least twice that many will visit our outdoor train car display. We have an antique train car display that includes a locomotive and several cars. We got a rural post office car, railway post office car. We have a refrigerator car. We have an executive office car, caboose, and a wrecker car. So we estimate that at least twice the number view those cars. We host 8 events there at the depot, and so those are community-wide events, and they're free of charge. We have volunteers that staff that. The McComb Rotary Club has been a very instrumental part in the expansion. The McComb Rotary Club donated $40,000 back in 2014, so that's been a good partnership. And then one Sunday morning, May the 30th of 2021, we had a tragedy at the depot, and the depot, we had a tragic fire that consumed a lot of the north end of the depot. It started in the north end, and it got up in the attic, and there was about a 12 or 15 mile an hour wind that day that was coming out of the north. And so I got a call from a neighbor of mine who had just left church, and she told me that the depot was on fire, that I needed to get down there right away. It looked like it was really bad. So when I drove up, that's when the first fire department unit had just arrived, and I knew that it was going to be bad with the wind blowing the way that it was. And so the depot, with the materials used back then, a lot of it was heart pine. And so it was an amazing job that the McComb Fire Department did, along with several other surrounding fire departments, to save the depot. We immediately started getting things out from the end of the building there, that the fire department officials and the firemen started getting things out and hoping that it wouldn't consume the entire building, but we didn't know it at the time how it would turn out. But they did an amazing job. It was a very courageous effort. A lot of skill and courage went into their efforts, and we will always be forever grateful to them. We appreciate the city officials also being there that day to kind of direct things. And so it was a very, very staggering loss. Our volunteers, though, we rolled up our sleeves. We went to work immediately to try to salvage the artifacts that we could dig out from the damaged building. We had about 19 days that we worked every day through the rain and the heat and the humidity, and I just can't say enough about the volunteers that went about trying to save as many artifacts. And we estimate that of the original artifacts, we were able to save about 90% of them. That's not to say that we didn't lose a lot of paper and artifacts and files and photos. We did. A lot of those we had already backed up on our computers and in the cloud. We were very fortunate. In fact, we were able to get our whole inventory list that we have gone about trying to see what we did were able to save. So we look forward to getting the depot, the remaining work that needs to be done, completed. The city had what they did is they applied for emergency status to try to put a roof on the building that we felt like could be saved. We had 4 professional opinions that yes, the walls on the south end were structurally sound enough to be rebuilt. And so once that was determined, then it allowed us to get a construction company to come in and stabilize the building, clean up the debris that was there, that had been there for quite a while. They also saved the walls that could be. They put another roof trusses on, and they were able to re-shingle it. It's a process that started in early January of 22, and it took about 9 weeks from start to finish to stabilize the building, get it dried out, get the roof on it. So the structure that you see today will be, the interior work will start as soon as the construction bids come in for the remaining work. In a public bid process, you have to have specifications that go out to the public, to contractors, and then you get bids in and you accept the lowest and best bid. So that's the process that we have to follow, that we look forward to completing over the next few weeks. And then we're hoping to be back in the building hopefully by the end of 2022 or early 2023. We look forward to enhancing the museum. There's a lot that's changed in terms of technology and how people like to go through a museum. There's a lot more interaction now with audio-visual equipment. We hope to have an engine simulator where someone can come in. If a child wants to see how a train works, they can sit in an engine simulator and actually drive the train themselves. So we look forward to different things. Kiosks is also a big part of what we plan to do. We have some volunteers that have been visiting other museums to get ideas. We feel like we had one of the best museums anywhere south of Chicago. We've been told that we have had a very good railroad museum. We look to enhance it and make it bigger and better than ever. We appreciate the public support. there will be some fundraising done. Fortunately, the city, we feel like, had adequate insurance with their policy. It was a replacement cost policy, as we understand it. The depot building is owned by the city, and of course the city selectmen have been supportive of our efforts to reestablish a museum inside the depot. It is a process. Mentioned that it's a public process that we feel like in a matter of months we'll be back in the museum, back in the depot for a long, long time, and hopefully maintain this museum so that we can always remember our railroad heritage and how we were formed. The city of McComb is a railroad town. We always have been associated with the railroad. There's still a lot of people that live in and around McComb that work for the railroad on the transportation side of things. There's engineers, and there's conductors and people that work in the repairs in the areas of in the New Orleans area. So the railroad still remains a very vital part of McComb, and hopefully it always will.